Hello everyone. So today I'll be discussing the case law of Royal British Bank versus Turquand, which happened in the year 1856. So, have you ever wondered how businesses can trust that a company's internal decisions are valid? Imagine lending money to a company only to be told later that their internal rules weren't followed. That's exactly what happened in the case of Royal British Bank versus Turquand, a case that shaped the indoor management rule. The case of Royal British Bank versus Turquoise is one of the most significant cases in the company law as it established the indoor management rule. This rule plays a crucial role in protecting all the third parties such as banks, investors, and suppliers who engage in business with the company. Before this case, external parties faced a significant risk when entering into contracts with companies because they could later be told that the company had not followed its own internal procedures, making the contract unenforceable. This uncertainty made business transactions more complicated and discouraged the commercial dealings. The ruling in this case provides a clear legal principle that when an outsider deals with a company in good faith, they are entitled to assume that the company's internal rules have been followed properly. They do not need to investigate whether the company officers have obtained the necessary internal approvals before entering into the agreements. This decision greatly simplified corporate transactions, increased confidence in business dealings, and remains a foundational principle in company law today. The parties involved in this case are the Royal British Bank, the plaintiff, who is a financial institution that had lent money to the company, Mr. Turkwan, the defendant, the official manager of the company, Cameron's Coal Company, who was responsible for handling its affair during the winding up. Next, we have the Cameron's Coal Company, the company that borrowed money and was at the center of the legal dispute. The background of the case. The dispute in this case arose between the Royal British Bank and the Humber Iron Works Company. The Humber Iron Works Company needed to borrow money and they decided to take a loan from the bank. The directors of the company signed the loan agreement, and based on this, the bank provided the necessary funds. However, the company's Articles of Association contained a rule stating that any borrowing required approval through a resolution passed by the company's shareholder. In this particular case, no such shareholder approval was actually obtained before the loan was taken. When the bank later demanded repayment, the Humber Ironwork Company refused to pay. The argument was that the loan was not legally binding because it had not been approved by the shareholders as required by their internal rules. Since this approval process had not been followed, they claimed that they were not legally obligated to repay the money. This led to a legal dispute between the two parties as the bank insisted that the directors had the authority to borrow on behalf of the company and that the loan agreement should be enforceable. Now, let's discuss the legal issue of this case. The key legal issue in this case was whether an external party dealing with the company is responsible for ensuring that the company has followed all of its internal rules before entering into contract. The Humber Iron Works Company argued that the loan agreement was invalid because it had not received the necessary shareholder approval. They claimed that the Royal British Bank should have checked whether this approval had been obtained before lending the money. On the other hand, the Royal British Bank argued that they had acted in good faith and had no reason to suspect that the company's internal approval process had not been followed. The directors of the company were its official representatives and they had the authority to sign the contracts. The bank had no practical way of whether knowing the company had followed its internal procedure, and it would be unfair to require external parties to investigate a company's internal affair before engaging in business with them. The central question before the court was, should a third party such as bank or investor be responsible for verifying whether a company has properly followed internal governance rules before entering into a contract? The answer to this question would determine whether the bank could enforce the loan agreement or whether the company could avoid repayment. So now, what was the court's judgment? So the court ruled in the favor of the Royal British Bank, establishing what became known as the Indoor Management Rule. This legal principle states that the third parties dealing with the company in good faith can assume that the company's internal rules and procedure have been followed. External parties are not responsible for investigating whether internal approvals have been properly obtained. As long as there are no obvious signs of fraud, dishonesty, or irregularities, the actions of the company officers are considered valid and binding. The court reasoned that placing the burden on third parties to verify a company's internal processes would create unnecessary complications and slow down business transactions. If banks, investors, and suppliers were required to investigate every internal corporate decision before entering into agreements, it would discourage economic activity and create excessive uncertainty in the business world. Instead, the responsibility for ensuring compliance with internal rules should rest within the company itself, not on the outsiders who have no way of knowing whether all internal procedures have been followed. What was the final decision? The final ruling in Royal British Bank versus Turquand had a profound impact. By introducing the indoor management rule, the case established a safeguard for third parties engaging in business with companies. The ruling ensured that the companies could not escape their contractual obligations simply by claiming that they had failed to follow their own internal rules. This decision made commercial transactions more efficient and reliable, as external parties could trust that the company officers had the necessary authority to act on behalf of the company. However, the rule does come with certain exceptions. The indoor management rule does not apply in the cases where the third party was aware that the company had not followed its internal procedures. If an external party has actual knowledge that internal approvals were missing, they cannot claim protection under the rule. Fraud or dishonesty was involved. If a company officer is engaging in fraudulent activities and the third party is complicit or should have reasonably suspected fraud, the rule does not apply. There were clear warning signs or irregularities that should have alerted the third party. If the circumstances were suspicious enough that a reasonable person would have questioned whether internal rules were being followed, the third party cannot claim they were acting in good faith. Despite these exceptions, the ruling in Royal British Bank versus Turquand remains a fundamental principle in modern corporate law. It ensures that businesses, banks, and investors have confidently engaged in commercial transactions without having to verify internal company procedure, reducing legal uncertainty and promoting smooth business operations. Now, as we have discussed the case, let's end it with a conclusion. The Royal British Bank versus Turquoise case had a major impact on corporate law, shaping the way business operate even today. Before this case, companies could avoid their obligations by claiming that they had not followed their internal approval processes. This created confusions and made it difficult for banks, suppliers, and investors to trust business transactions. With this case, the court established the indoor management rule, which helped ensure smooth and efficient business dealings. It protects third parties who act in good faith by allowing them to assume that a company has followed its own internal procedure. This means that external parties do not need to investigate a company's internal approvals every time they enter into a contract. Instead, the company itself is responsible for ensuring its internal rules are followed. This principle continues to play a vital role in business transactions today. Banks can lend money without unnecessary delays, investors can confidently fund businesses, and suppliers can trust the signed agreements will be honored. Without this rule, every deal would require excessive investigation, making business operations slow and complicated. By setting a legal standard, this case helped build trust in corporate transactions. It ensures that businesses cannot simply escape their commitments due to internal mistakes, making the corporate world more stable and predictable. This decision remains one of the key foundations of the modern company law, ensuring that businesses can function efficiently without unnecessary legal hurdles. Thank you.